They laughed at, not behind his back to his face. It was supposed to be a serious meeting. A board meeting, in fact. One of those formal, high-level gatherings where important decisions about the future of a company are made. Everyone in the room wore tailored suits, polished shoes, and expensive watches. They spoke in confident tones, using big business words, sharing graphs and charts like they ran the world. And then there was him, a young man, late 20s, calm, quiet, no briefcase, no tie, no fake smile. Just a clean shirt, a focused face, and a presence that nobody really noticed at first. The moment he walked in, people glanced at him like he didn't belong. Some assumed he was someone's assistant. Others thought he was maybe a junior employee sent to take notes. No one asked who he was. No one even thought it was necessary. They just saw a young face and made up their minds. As the meeting went on, he sat at the edge of the table, listening carefully. He took no notes. He didn't interrupt, he waited. Then, after over 30 minutes of watching the same few voices dominate the room, he finally spoke. "Excuse me, I have a quick suggestion." Before he could finish, one of the older men raised his hand and said, "Son, maybe sit this one out. We're discussing real matters here." The room chuckled. Not loudly, but enough to feel it. The young man simply nodded and leaned back. He didn't argue. He didn't fight. But something in his eyes changed. He wasn't hurt, just quiet. The kind of quiet that usually means something big is coming. That moment, right there, would become one they would all remember for a very long time. But not for the reason they thought. Because what they didn't realize, not one of them, was that this quiet young man, the one they dismissed, ignored, and joked about, was the most powerful person in that room. He wasn't there to take notes. He wasn't there to learn. He was there because he owned more of the company than anyone else sitting around that table. In fact, he owned more than all of them put together. They just didn't know it yet. This is a true story. One that teaches us a hard truth about how people judge others based on how they look, how old they are, or how loudly they speak. But sometimes, it's the quietest person in the room who ends up having the final word. Before we get to that moment, the moment when he stood up and revealed the truth, let's go back a little. Let's look at the company, the board, and how this young man ended up in that room in the first place. Because once you understand the full picture, the ending will hit even harder. The company was no small name. It was a well-established business, not a flashy startup, but a strong, respected firm in the tech and engineering space. It had been around for decades, known for its steady growth, smart investments, and a board filled with experienced businessmen. Most of them had been there for years, maybe even since the beginning. Some had gray hair, others had long titles and longer resumes. They were proud of their achievements, and they believed they knew how things should be done. The board meetings were usually the same every month. Formal, predictable. The same few voices did most of the talking. They had a rhythm, a routine. They liked things to stay that way. So when a young man walked into one of those meetings, things already felt different, and not everyone liked that. He didn't look like one of them. He didn't try to. No fancy watch, no printed agenda, no loud entrance. He came in quietly, took a seat, and listened. No one asked who he was. No one welcomed him. A few people glanced over, wondering if he had entered the wrong room, but no one bothered to ask. The Shairaman, a man in his late 60s with a deep voice and strong presence, carried on as usual. Reports were shared. Sales numbers were discussed. There was talk of upcoming projects, stock performance, and a few internal concerns. Everything was moving normally, until the young man raised his hand slightly and offered to give a quick suggestion. It was at that moment the tone shifted. People looked at each other. One of them actually laughed under his breath. Another whispered, "Who is this kid?" The Shahiraman didn't even answer the young man's suggestion. Instead, he turned to someone else and carried on with the meeting. It was like the young man had spoken into a wall. But here's the thing. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened to him. He was used to being overlooked. People always assumed he was too young, too inexperienced, or too quiet. What they didn't know was that he'd been around this company long before they noticed, watching, learning, preparing. You see, his last name didn't appear on the meeting notes. His profile wasn't public. But his connection to the company went deeper than any of them knew. And while they were too busy talking, he was quietly changing the future, one decision at a time. In their eyes, he was just a guest. But the truth? He was the one holding the seat with the most power. And soon they would all find out what the meeting dragged on, and with every passing minute, the line between business and ego became clearer. The young man continued to listen. He had the same focused expression on his face, calm and steady. But inside, he was watching, observing. Not just the financial slides or business updates. He was paying attention to people, their tone, their habits, their pride. He raised his hand again, not in a loud way, but just enough to show he had something to say. He brought up a valid concern, a risk in the company's upcoming expansion strategy. It wasn't something emotional or out of place. It was based on numbers, data, logic. He even offered a possible solution, something innovative. But before he could even finish, a man 3 seats down smirked and said, "This isn't the place to throw out ideas from business school textbooks." Another leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and added, "We have been doing this for decades, kid. Just watch and take notes." The young man didn't respond. He simply nodded. But the energy in the room shifted, and not in his favor. Even the ones who didn't speak up were silently agreeing. Their eyes said it all. "You're not one of us." Every time he tried to add value, they brushed him off. Not because what he said was wrong, but because they didn't want to believe someone like him, someone younger, quieter, and unfamiliar, could know what he was talking about. They judged him not by his words, but by what they assumed he wasn't. At one point, one of the board members actually joked, "We should have brought coffee for the intern," looking straight at him. The room laughed, not because the joke was funny, but because it gave them permission to keep looking down on him. Not one person stepped in. Not one person asked, "Wait, who is he really?" They didn't care. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He didn't throw around big titles or try to prove himself. And in a room full of men used to showing off their experience and success, that kind of humility made them uncomfortable. So they handled it the only way they knew how, with disrespect. But here's the part they didn't understand. Silence is not weakness. Calm is not confusion. And just because someone isn't demanding attention doesn't mean they don't deserve it. The young man had no anger on his face, no frustration. He didn't roll his eyes or argue back. He simply listened and waited, because he knew something they didn't. He knew that the real power in that room wasn't in who spoke the most or who had the oldest resume. It was in who had the final say. And in just a few moments, they would learn exactly who that was. The meeting was nearly over. The usual voices had spoken. The usual decisions were being finalized. And the young man? Still quiet, still calm, still patient. Then something happened. The Shairaman glanced toward him, not with interest, but with irritation. It was as if the young man's quiet presence had finally become too noticeable to ignore. He cleared his throat and asked, "Sorry, we didn't catch your name. Are you with someone?" For a second, the room went silent. Just a second. Everyone turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time since he entered. The young man smiled politely, leaned forward and said, "No, I'm not with anyone. I'm here because I own 52% of this company." The words dropped like a bomb. Silence. Real silence. Not one person moved. A few blinked. One man's pen slipped from his hand. Another slowly sat up straighter, as if he suddenly realized this wasn't a joke. The same people who had ignored him, mocked him, and laughed at him, now stared at him like they would seen a ghost. "Excuse me?" the Shairaman asked, clearly stunned. "I'm the majority shareholder," the young man repeated, calmly. "I've been acquiring shares quietly over the last 3 years, through a holding company, through private buyouts. Some of you even sold your shares to me. You just didn't know it was me." Now the room wasn't just quiet, it was frozen. No one could believe what they had just heard. The same young man they thought didn't belong, the one they treated like an outsider, actually owned more of the company than all of them put together. Some looked confused, some embarrassed. A few turned red in the face. The young man continued, still speaking in a calm voice. "I didn't speak earlier because I wanted to hear how this board actually works when they don't think the owner is watching. I wanted to see who respects ideas and who just listens to power." There was no yelling, no anger, just truth. And that truth was louder than any speech he could have given. The meeting didn't continue after that. People began gathering their papers. Some avoided eye contact. Others sat in stunned silence, unsure of what to say or do next. Because in just one moment, one quiet, powerful moment, everything changed. After the silence in the boardroom, the question that hung in the air was, who is this guy? And the real story behind the young man. It was even more surprising than they expected. He wasn't a new investor. He wasn't some outsider trying to make a name for himself. He had a history with the company, a personal one. His father was one of the original founders. Not the flashy kind who did interviews and took credit, but the quiet type who believed in working hard behind the scenes. He was a builder, a thinker, someone who put the company's mission first. While the world saw the company as just another successful firm, to the young man, it was something else. It was part of his family's legacy. He had memories of sitting in his father's home office, listening to business calls, watching prototypes being sketched on paper, and hearing late-night conversations about making payroll during tough times. He had seen the sacrifices, the stress, the belief, and the love his father had poured into the business. When his father passed away unexpectedly, the young man was only in his early 20s. He inherited a quiet fortune, including a large portion of the company's shares. At the time, he wasn't ready to lead. He didn't want to rush into a world of meetings and suits before he understood it. So, he chose a different path. He disappeared from the spotlight. But he didn't waste time. He studied business, finance, technology, law, anything connected to running a company. He worked behind the scenes, took internships under fake names, even traveled to see how other companies were run in different parts of the world. While others chased titles, he chased experience. And as the years passed, he kept an eye on the company. He noticed the culture shifting. The heart his father had built was slowly fading. The board grew colder, more distant from the employees. They stopped taking risks. They started focusing more on appearances than innovation. Some of the older shareholders began selling off their portions. That's when he made his move. He created a holding company, a shell that let him buy shares without using his real name. He contacted sellers personally, offering them clean, quiet exits. Many were happy to sell, thinking they were just offloading stock to another faceless investor. They had no idea the person behind the deals was the founder's son, the quiet kid they had seen years ago at company parties, now all grown up. Over time, the numbers added up. 5%, 12%, then 30%, and finally 52%. He didn't go to the media. He didn't even tell most of the executive team, because he wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in truth. He wanted to see how the people running the company treated someone they thought had no power. And the moment he walked into that boardroom, he got his answer. They didn't just fail to respect him. They failed to respect the very values the company was built on: humility, listening, growth. That meeting wasn't just a business session. For him, it was a test. A test the board had no idea they were taking. And when he told them who he really was, and what he really owned, it wasn't about ego. It was about change. Real change. Because if they treated him that way, someone who owned the majority of the company, how were they treating junior staff? Interns? Fresh thinkers? People with real ideas but no title. That day, the truth came out. And the company would never be the same again. The boardroom didn't feel so powerful anymore. After the young man revealed he was the majority shareholder, no one quite knew what to do. The people who had laughed just minutes earlier were now completely silent. Some avoided his eyes. Others stared at the table, unsure whether to speak, apologize, or quietly leave. The Shiraman, once the loudest voice in the room, looked pale. For a moment he tried to regain control, clearing his throat and saying something about clearing up the misunderstanding. But the young man wasn't confused. He hadn't misunderstood anything. He had heard everything. And now, so had everyone else. The meeting didn't continue as planned. A few members gathered their papers and left quickly. Others stayed behind, hoping to speak to the young man privately. But he wasn't angry. He wasn't there to punish anyone. He was there to lead. Over the next few days, big changes followed. First, a formal announcement was made. The company had a new majority owner. No press release, no flashy headline, just a quiet internal memo. But inside the company, word spread fast. Employees who had never been noticed suddenly found themselves being asked for ideas. Junior staff were invited to meetings. Department heads were told to stop managing from the top down and start listening more. The board was reshaped. A few members resigned, some out of embarrassment, others because they knew their time was up. In their place, the young man appointed people who had fresh ideas, open minds, and the humility to listen. Age didn't matter. Title didn't matter. Respect did. He didn't fire everyone. He didn't turn the company upside down overnight. Instead, he made thoughtful changes, ones that honored his father's original vision while also pushing the business into the future. Under his quiet leadership, the culture of the company began to shift. Meetings became more open. Decisions were questioned and debated, not shut down. People started to speak up more. Not because they were told to, but because they finally felt heard. And the old board? They learned something that day they would never forget. They learned that respect isn't about status or suits or speaking the loudest. It's about recognizing value, even when it comes in a form you didn't expect. The young man never raised his voice. He never demanded respect. He simply revealed the truth. And that truth did all the talking. Sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one no one's paying attention to. That young man didn't walk into the boardroom looking for a fight. He didn't slam his hand on the table or demand to be heard. He didn't walk in with a title or a fancy introduction. He came in with something much stronger: purpose, patience, and quiet confidence. And that's what changed everything. What happened in that meeting wasn't just about business politics. It was a mirror to how so many people are treated in real life. We have all seen it: the student ignored by a teacher, the employee dismissed in a team meeting, the soft-spoken one in a loud group, always being interrupted, the one who dresses differently, talks differently, or just doesn't look the part. People often confuse loudness with leadership and age with authority. But true strength doesn't need to be loud. True power doesn't need to prove itself. It just shows up, does the work, and waits for the right moment. This story reminds us that you never know who someone really is. You never know what they've been through, what they carry inside them, or what they are capable of doing. And if you've ever been overlooked, let down, or disrespected, you're not alone. But don't let their noise shake your focus. Don't let their laughter weaken your voice. Let it motivate you. Let it teach you how to move smarter, build stronger, and grow in silence. Because one day, the same people who didn't take you seriously will have to stand and listen. This young man didn't seek revenge. He didn't humiliate the board. He let the truth speak for itself. And that's the real lesson. Let your actions be louder than their doubts. Let your results speak louder than their insults. In the end, respect isn't something you can beg for or force. It's something you earn. And when it finally comes, it comes because you stayed true to yourself, even when others didn't believe in you. So to anyone watching this right now who feels underestimated, remember this: you don't need to prove yourself to everyone. You just need to keep building, learning, growing, and waiting for your moment, because it will come. And when it does, let them be the ones who finally have to ask, wait, who are you? If this story meant something to you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear this today. And tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated? How did you rise above it? Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us that the quietest people often carry the loudest impact. Until next time, stay patient, stay prepared, and never forget, the world doesn't need you to be louder. It needs you to be real.